Welcome to Maritime Matters, a podcast focused on leaders in the maritime market, the people, the companies, the technologies that are making and breaking the news, helping to lead the maritime industry to a safer, more efficient, more profitable, and cleaner future. Welcome aboard. This Maritime Matters podcast is brought to you by ABS, a global classification leader driving a sustainable future for the maritime industry. From alternative fuels to digitalization to regulatory compliance, ABS understands the challenges facing today's ship owners and operators. By combining deep technical knowledge with the latest digital technologies, ABS provides clients with innovative, tailored, and practical sustainability solutions that deliver results. Show the world your commitment to sustainability with ABS. Learn more at www.eagle.org. Welcome, everyone. My name is Greg Troutwine. I'm the editor and publisher of Maritime Reporter and Engineering News, and I'm very pleased to moderate the cybersecurity in the maritime sector, what you need to know now. We have an outstanding panel, so we're gonna start the process here very shortly. But we have Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin, Assistant Commandant for the Prevention of Policy, U.S. Coast Guard. Angelique, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Zizamatu. Very, very good. The Director of Cybersecurity for the American Bureau of Shipping. Philip Bannerman, down on the end, the Vice President, Sales, America for Marinelink. We have Dane Detillier, the Executive Vice President, LNG Operations for Harvey Gulf. And last but certainly not least, Stuart Alpert, the Chief Information Security Officer and CTO for the Hornblower Group.
For coming along today, I'm Philip Bannerman. I'm the Vice President of Maritime Sales for Marinelink. Many of you who know Marinelink, if we were talking 5 years ago, would say, "Oh, you guys are the VSAT guys." And fast forwarding now, the market is very different. There's various connectivity solutions come onto the market, and whilst connectivity is still a huge part of our business, we've shifted from being the VSAT guys to more of a managed network provider. And alongside that comes all the risks of cybersecurity, which of course is the topic today. So we've invested heavily in the last few years in our cybersecurity portfolio. So from a connectivity perspective, we're present on about 25,000 ships globally. And from a cybersecurity perspective, we're currently managing through our Security Operations Center around about 2,000 ships. But we've recently made a couple of strategic acquisitions in the cyberspace. We bought two companies, one called Diverto, one called Port IT, and in fact some of our new colleagues are in the room today. So if you combine Marlink's existing portfolio with the Port IT portfolio on cyber vessels, it's actually closer to about 5,000 vessels where we're managing cybersecurity. So.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Dane?
Yeah, like Greg said, my name is Dane Detillier. I'm Executive Vice President at Harvey Gulf and LNG Operations. Harvey Gulf is an offshore supply boat company. We have different types of vessels in our company. We roughly have right now 60 vessels in our fleet. We range from small crew vessels to all the way to construction vessels at 340 feet long with 250-ton cranes on them that house 150 people on board. So we have a very diverse fleet. My specialty is LNG, obviously, but the thing about why cybersecurity and all this technology digitalization is important, because as technology increases in the maritime industry, there's definitely a high risk, necessarily high risk, but a high awareness of cybersecurity with this new technology, especially when you're dealing with alternative fuels sources that are not the traditional types of fuels. Also, another company I'm part of is a company called QLNG Transport. It was the first LNG articulated tug barge in the United States. We're bunkering Carnival cruise ships on the east coast of the United States with that vessel. Again, very high-tech vessel. There's actually, that vessel is kind of unique with technology advancements too, is that the tug and barge can be separated over 1,500 feet, and all the control systems on the barge can be controlled from the tug. So again, very high-tech vessel as far as technology, and being able to secure the technology on the barge from the tug was a big task for us too.
Excellent, thank you. Angeliki?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Angeliki Zisimatu. I've been the Director of Cybersecurity for ABS. I've been with ABS for the last 18 years in different roles. The last 8 I've been dealing with industrial cybersecurity on and off on the consulting side with ABS Group and the ABS technology team. Within ABS technology, we are responsible of the different guides and rules, regulations that are coming and are tied to ABS and what ABS is putting out to the industry, along with joint development projects, AIPs related to cyber resilience and cybersecurity, whether that would be with shipyards, suppliers, or owners. ABS, I think you all know who ABS is. It's one of the leading classification societies. We started down the path of the cybersecurity back in 2016 when we introduced new guides on cybersecurity for marine and offshore structures, along with optional notations, including primarily requirements on the operational technology side. And we've been moving along this journey for the last 8 years now, 8-9 years. And now it's more of a hot topic than what it used to be, like 8 years ago. Nobody was talking about it at that time. But now there is more regulation coming from different regulatory bodies, and of course Coast Guard is one. So there is a lot of more involvement as far as to interpreting the requirements and understanding the requirements and guiding our clients the right way.
Excellent, thank you. Stuart?
I'm Stuart Alpert. I'm head of cybersecurity and technology for Hornblower Group. Hornblower Group is the umbrella company for a bunch of diversified maritime business units, each of which focus on things that are almost completely different, ranging from running city ferry systems such as New York City Ferry to running leisure cruises such as city cruises all around the US, Canada, and UK. We have divisions that design and build boats. We have divisions that do maintenance on boats. We have a military and government services division. And so we're all over the map with the sets of both boats and services that we provide. Some of these are passenger focused, some of these are utility focused, and from a cybersecurity point of view, we have both the responsibility for cybersecurity across the fleet as well as across the enterprise itself. And the enterprise is fairly widespread and diverse. 129 offices, 400 points of service, where a point of service could be, let's say, a ticket booth or a maintenance depot or a fuel depot. And so good international footprint to have to deal with. Cybersecurity is a very, very active daily activity at our company, and I'll talk about it more as we get into the panel here.
Last but certainly not least, it's very funny, actually, when we formed this panel, I told everyone no presentation, so naturally then I asked Admiral Arguin to give a brief keynote presentation. So if you could just give a little background on yourself, but then give an overview of this entire maritime cybersecurity situation and what we can be expecting from the Coast Guard in the coming months.
All right, well, thanks for the opportunity. Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Arguin. I'm the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, and really my job within the Coast Guard is to develop policy for pretty much anything that interacts with the marine transportation system. Everything from licensing to ship design, facility security, vessel security, and of course, cybersecurity. And the sort of the role that the Coast Guard plays, along with other interagency partners as the regulator, but then also verification, compliance at our field units, really is, and I think the cyber problem set that we're dealing with is a very different set of risks. And so if you're looking at trying to ensure the safety, security, resiliency of the marine transportation system, historically we're looking at systems that are maybe may be black and white. So you have a fire extinguisher that is designed to put out a fire. The cyber challenge, given the increasing complexity of the system, it was mentioned alternative fuels. Each one of those systems that is emerging technology that is being brought to bear within the marine transportation system comes with cyber vulnerabilities baked into it. The challenge is that those vulnerabilities can be exploited across many different domains. They move with great speed. And so a vulnerability that is exploited, say, on a small passenger vessel in Cleveland could very easily be exploited in nanoseconds around the world if that same vulnerability exists. And so how do you address providing the sort of a floor of protection to shore up cyber vulnerabilities, close those gaps, those windows, while also still offering the opportunity to take advantage of technologies that make individual companies or individual industries competitive on the world market? So it's a really challenging balance that is not going to be something that can be drawn, you snap the chalk line, your stability is X and that's it, and it's going to be it for time. Cyber requirements, cyber protocols, cyber plans are going to have to constantly be assessed. You're not going to be able to take a regulation and say, here you go, this is the answer. If you do this, this, and this, you're safe. For a variety of reasons. We all have access to phones. Those phones are vulnerable. Those phones are regularly being updated and exploited. And the information that is on those systems, if you're not regularly assessing whether or not those vulnerabilities exist and that you're looking for active ways to close those down, you may be exposing yourself to malicious actors, or it may even be just computers that don't talk to each other. So at the end of the day, when you think about the problem set, we're seeing a greater demand for shipping. So everybody here is expecting to push more ships, more cargo. Everybody wants their Amazon gifts and Nikes and PlayStations overnight. We've become a consumer demand market, which means more shipping. That shipping is being pressurized to try and do that same thing, more of it, in a more environmentally sensitive way. And the only way you become more environmentally sensitive in this day and age is to bring in emerging technology, newer technologies that are more and more reliant on interconnected systems across the board. And this is not just inherently maritime. And so understanding the influence of those risks across the board, the rapid pace with which those can be exploited, is something that is hypercritical. The other thing I would say is a lot of times we focus on the physical implications of a cyber attack. So the idea that somebody could take over a system, right? You've got cranes out there that somehow somebody takes advantage of and turns them into a transformer and it starts stomping the port out. That is certainly one aspect of a physical breach of security. But there's a whole nother element of data security. And we were talking at lunch about the expansion of AI in the marketplace. Data is the coin of the realm. And if you don't have control of your data, and that data can be exploited through the use of AI, you may be opening yourself to vulnerabilities that aren't necessarily something that could be taken advantage of on your facility or on your vessel, but then could paint a picture of your patterns of life that could be used either from a market perspective or for nefarious actors to try and take advantage of understanding information that could then make you vulnerable in other ways. And so when you think about, and at least when I think about it from a Coast Guard perspective, there's the physical security. Make sure your networks are protected, that you're regularly evaluating those networks for people leaving things behind or access points. But then there's also, do you have control over the information that you're generating? Because if somebody else has control over that information, they're aggregating that data and then being able to use that in ways that we've never seen before. And so that's something that is not necessarily a Coast Guard issue. That data security piece applies across all modes of transportation, all sectors, and that's something that really needs to be thought about. How do you encrypt information? And to me, from a business perspective, this is business sort of espionage, right? You don't want your competitors to know that you're going after a particular contract or that you're seeing a potential opportunity in a market. So you understand how to control that information. Do we know that everybody has that same sort of control over their information that's being pulled off? Every system that you add, your computer, the IT side of things, do you have access and understand where that information is being stored? Who has access to that information is something I think is really the next level on a cyber, sort of the cyber protocols. How do you deal with data security? while you're also ensuring that you have physical security from your network side of the house.
Okay, that's excellent. Obviously, the vessel owners, everyone's interested in the coming Coast Guard rules. Can you give us a status of where we are today and what vessel owners can reasonably expect to see in the new rules? And then, I'll ask everyone just to chime in, because I had a great conversation with Angeliki probably about a month ago when we were putting this panel together. And, she said, and she was referencing some of her conversations with vessel owners that were saying, cybersecurity is a hoax. So I know everyone has definite insights and different opinions, but when we look specifically at the rules, can you just give us an update on what we can reasonably expect?
Yeah, so before we do that, though, does anybody out here think cyber is a hoax? It's like, it's not a big deal? You might be in the wrong room if so. So while I can't get into the specific details of an active rulemaking, the notice to propose rulemaking has been on the street. We received over 400 comments from a variety of different stakeholders on sort of, did we get this right, and is there a better way to sort of get after that? We're actively working to get that final rule over the finish line so that is out as soon as possible. But our cyber rulemaking really followed very closely along with CISA's cross-sector cyber performance goals and the NIST standard. And in a very general sense, do you have a plan? Do you understand your network? Do you have somebody in charge? Are you exercising that plan? Are you regularly checking your networks to ensure that people aren't leaving things behind, who has access to that network? And then ultimately, if there is a breach, have you built in ways to be resilient? Because at the end of the day, when people take advantage of cyber vulnerabilities, if you think malware or phishing scams, the reason they're lucrative is because you don't have a backup plan. If everybody had a backup plan, if my server, Wayne's towing industry or whatever, my server gets compromised, and I flip this one off and flip it back on, I'm not paying somebody to get my money or get my information back, that lessens the likelihood of you being a target, because it's not going to be valuable to anyone. And so understanding how, if you haven't had a breach of security due to cyber, it's going to happen. To suggest that you're never going to be able to have a system, or you're only going to be able to develop a system that is so hard and fast that nobody can crack into it, you're fooling yourself. Mm-hmm. So you have to be understanding that at some point there will be a breach. How do you recover from that breach to maintain your operations going forward to minimize the downstream impacts? To me, that's in essence what that rule does. Understand your network, understand who has access to your network, understand what happens when there's a breach, how you recover quickly from it. And the other thing that is probably the most challenging, I think, from an industry perspective, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, but the lawyers will tell you, don't tell people that you've had a breach. There's a business problem there. You don't want to let people know that you've got a hole in your wall. But we've got to get over that, right? Because the same vulnerabilities that exist maybe in a hornblower boat may exist at a water treatment plant, or may exist at in a different area. And so while there may have been an exploitation of your particular system, and that's going to be terrible for you, if I know about that, I can then broadcast that out and say, close the door. Here's a vulnerability. It's a known exploited vulnerability. Close the door now, and maybe we limit the cascading effect. But if you don't tell somebody and you sit on it and you wait, I mentioned how quickly that cascades and sort of rapidly whips around the world to exploit those vulnerabilities, then you probably are not going to be able to help us close those doors as quickly as we need to. So we've got to find a way. It's a shared responsibility. We, federal government, owe you, if we have information that says, hey, somebody's looking to take advantage of a particular system or a particular element of a system, we owe it to be able to get that information rapidly to you so that you know that those vulnerabilities exist and that you can close them. We also need to have that same feedback when you have a known issue so that we can widely spread that out and minimize the potential downstream implications.
Okay, excellent. I always tell everyone I'm not going to call on them on a panel, and invariably I call on them. So Stuart and Dane, if you could just chime in. I'm curious to hear from the operator's perspective, A, your understanding of what could be coming down, and B, more importantly, just kind of an overview of of your systems now? I mean, I know cybersecurity is one of those topics that's difficult to talk about because you don't want to give away too much, but can you give some sort of insight of where you are as organizations today and looking at the rules that could potentially be coming down, how you expect that to reasonably impact your operations?
You want to start, or should I?
Doesn't matter.
All right, I'll take it. So, we've read through the notice of proposed rulemaking. We 100% agree with what's in there. We realize and applaud that we need to take small steps. We also realize it's the first step. There's a lot more that needs to go into it. The 4 biggest problems in cybersecurity are old technology, new technology, people, and everybody else's information.
This Maritime Matters, the Marinelink Podcast, is brought to you by Marinelink. Marinelink is the leader in managed services for business-critical IT solutions, enabling transformation for remote assets on land and at sea.
The number of times we've come across the major flaws not being in the network, but being on the human side of things, far outweighs the number of flaws we found on the networks. And so we applaud this wholeheartedly. On our side, the major gaps are integrating the actual Marine teams with the cybersecurity teams. We've had Marine teams that have had, facility or CSO responsibilities who are not cyber people.
Right.
And so, recently we just started having discussions that say, maybe we should do something about that, right? Train people, cross-train people, get people aware of things like this. There's there's active cooperation. I see Scott's here. Hi, Scott. Spoke to John Lake about, literally deputizing our CSOs and teaching them the cyber side of things. And that is in the plans for the future. Meanwhile, we are a shop that uses NIST as our measuring stick. NIST is one of those things that's so overwhelmingly complex that you can never get it all done. By the time you do, it's changed. But we use it as, as a guide stone. And we've been fairly successful in nearly every area except the human area. Our major breaches in the past couple of years on both the enterprise side and anything having to do with Marine has been human error, or sometimes deliberate human malice. Now, I did also mention outside information. And what we've noted from the cybersecurity side in Hornblower is people use open source intelligence and signals against us constantly, whether it's sending that piece of mail for a bill of sale that we were expecting nobody was supposed to know about, and somehow somebody knew about it and sent us some malware with it, or whether it's sending a false signal of some sort that causes people to react to it and compromise either financial systems or cyber systems within the company. It's the worst problem we have. We're only able to put so many technical measures in place when the human side rears its head. And there's only so much training you can do, I find myself sometimes looking at something going, should I click, should I click, should I click? And
that kind of goes hand in hand with the AI as well, because again, we're all used to getting those phishing emails that are poorly written. And I was just reading something, it might have been the Wall Street Journal, about how AI is helping them to actually write them to be more intelligible. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. And one last thing before I turn it over here. Yeah. One of the things that we do at Hornblower that is a fairly young practice amongst this industry in particular is use of signals intelligence and open source intelligence to protect yourself. We do active information sharing with about 10,000 other organizations. We have agreements in place that pass the details of attacks and attempted attacks to each other. And we first put this in place along with some automation that takes action based upon what we receive. And a fellow maritime company, in the first 3 weeks we had this in place, was attacked with a Cobalt Strike package. It was ransomware that was crafted using the Cobalt Strike that escaped, the old version. We verified it wasn't the Coasties testing us. Sorry, Admiral. We pushed the indicators of compromise out to our apparatus, our firewalls, our intrusion detection systems, our endpoint protection, and our DNS blocking. Within 3 minutes of receiving the signals that a fellow maritime company was attacked. 38 minutes later, we were attacked through the same mechanisms, and sat there looking at it going, holy crap, that worked. You know, that actually worked. And since then, we've averted many, many attacks by simply, as the Admiral suggested, paying attention to what goes on with other folks. If other folks are willing to say, these are the IP addresses that attacked us, this was the mechanism they used, these were the DNS names involved, these are the signatures of the ransomware that we got, they're giving you everything you need to be able to defend. All you need is some way to push that to your apparatus. Of course, you have to have the apparatus in place, but if you've got firewalls, you've got intrusion detection or prevention systems, you can do it. And it's something that seems to be so under-addressed in many markets, but particularly ours here.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. Dan, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so when the Coast Guard came, and we've seen the publications when it come out that all companies that are in the marine industry is going to need to have a cybersecurity plan in place. To be honest, there was a panic going on because we knew the timeline and we're like, hey, we got to get this done. We got to get, you know, because internally you have your own systems in place, but then when you look at the guidelines from the Coast Guard, you know, you got to make sure you check off XXX. And so the thing that we did was we turned towards ABS Group, to be honest with everyone. ABS Group came in and kind of gave us the framework to put in place. So we met the deadlines and everything, and it's in place. And so, but our thing now is, okay, the plan's in place now, we have to implement this plan, you know? And so now that we're starting to see that, hey, this is good, this plan can be really great if you're utilizing it and implementing it and enforcing it. So the biggest thing that we're finding right now is that there's a gap between the technology that's out there and the humans that work for us and employees and their knowledge. And it varies and it fluctuates. And Greg, you I think mentioned this too earlier, but so you put out all this training, okay? And some of these employees, you know, especially our younger employees will have a tendency, I know all this stuff. You know, why y'all keep on sending me these trainings? It takes me 10 seconds to get it done with, you know, like. So the thing we did this year, we rolled out was to do individual employee self-assessment pre-testing. So where we sent out a pre-test to all our employees to test their knowledge on different cybersecurity, you know, features. And then that kind of set the bar for each individual employee on what next step they should take as far as their knowledge. It also helped guide us to know what areas of content we need to target as far as our company-wide notices. And so now that's been rolling out for the last couple of months, we're starting to see the benefits of it. IT department just rolled out, they sent out a practice email that was phishing. They did it on purpose to see how many people would click it and stuff. And right away, their phones were getting blown out because they were like, everybody's calling us. They want to know if this is real and all. Like, well, it's working. It's helping. The training's helping. So I think the education part of all of it is the crucial part that we're living in right now. The bad thing, though, is that while we're trying to educate everyone, technology is still evolving. It keeps on advancing, and we're never going to catch up to it. It seems like, and it's just, it's important. Definitely the Coast Guard had to put that guideline because that is crucial. I mean, if you look at especially the cargoes that we're hauling today, these vessels, it's amazing. And in the marine industry for quite a while. You look at UN numbers on the back of trailers on trucks and see what they're hauling, and you see what kind of products they're hauling on our roads today. It's not just in marine transport, it's in trucking transport. It's crazy if you really look into the details on what this stuff that's being hauled. And so the cybersecurity part of it, though, is the crucial aspect as this technology keeps on increasing that we all have to get a hold on. And while I truly, fully agree, the sharing of information is needed across the board. And we can look at institutions here in the United States, like AMSA and so forth, that stuff can be done. It's easily accomplished. It's not hard to do.
Yeah, okay, that's excellent. So Philip and Angeliki, you both kind of come from unique perspectives as well. And Philip, I believe you said you're on 25,000 vessels globally?
Yeah.
Is that correct? And I know also Marinelink has a SOC report, a report basically breaking down what the threats are, what they are. So, I'd like to hear from both of you, but Philip, can you just kind of start us off? I mean, from your perspective, I'm interested. You have a unique perspective in looking at a broader field and the sharing of this information. So what are you seeing as far as the pervasiveness of the threat, and what are you hearing as well?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier on, we've got our current maritime SOC prior to the acquisition of Port IT. We're managing about 2,000 vessels, so we've got quite a good overview on different countries, different segments of the market. So we published our half-yearly SOC report recently, and I guess the main takeaways, and I hope everyone's sitting down and holding onto your seats, but no surprise was that cyber threats are on the increase compared to last year. And even within this year, if we look at January's numbers for recorded incidents, it was around about 100,000. By April, it was up to 270,000, just in that short space of time. And then some more numbers. The most pervasive type of attack was a phishing attack, which was, I think, around about 48% of our recorded attacks. And then that was closely followed by command and control threats, which was around about 36%. So that made up the bulk of the reported incidents. The other observation that we saw was that whilst the overall percentage was quite small, it was quite a steep increase coming from botnets attacking OT equipment on board. And I think it's sort of been hinted at already in some of the preamble. But the vulnerabilities that come from there. So that's telling us that the cyber attackers are becoming a bit more sophisticated and becoming a bit more targeted towards our industry, which perhaps they weren't before.
So, since you've all talked and there's been a lot of good information, I think I'm going to start with a question. And the question is, we have here today operators who have been proactive. The question is, what happens with the ones who are not really proactive, have not really done much? They are smaller, they are operating 1, 2, 3 vessels, they don't really have large fleets, and they have to follow regulations like what the Coast Guard has put out, which is a baseline really, but if you really look into the details, there's a lot there, and it requires a lot of resources, both financial resources and human resources, which they don't have. And at the same time, a number of other regulations coming from IMO, coming from Ajax, coming from class charterers who have their own requests depending on locations and risk. How are these operators going to be responding? That is a question that I think we're receiving a lot. Because we're facing all sorts of different ship owners and management companies with different needs. And they're having a lot of questions as far as whether there are going to be relaxations and considerations for the different operational aspects, the different complexity of the systems that they have on board. Not all systems are the same. We can have fully autonomous small vessels that we have seen at coastal waters, and then we have others which are really old, and they would have to follow the same regulation. So what happens then? As a question to the Coast Guard, I guess, and then I can talk a little bit about the information sharing and incident response.
I'm so glad it wasn't a question to me. So yes, I'll let the Admiral attack that.
So just maybe a couple of finer points. Number one, the regulation, given the process that we had to use and the speed that we went with, did not offer a tiering of requirements. It's a known challenge across the board. The marine transportation system and those that work in and around it are not a homogeneous monolith, and there are every sort of variation and perturbation, whether it's something that is old as our waterways commerce cutters that have old school copper wiring, or the newest autonomous systems. You're going to have to be able to provide a right-sized, what makes sense for that particular operation. At the end of the day, though, regardless of regulation, when we send our teams out to do assessments, when other CISA, FBI, other teams that have gone out and done voluntary assessments, it's quite surprising how basic cyber hygiene is the entry to protecting your network. And when I say basic cyber hygiene, I'm talking about having a password that isn't password, right?
You put $2 signs on the S's.
$2 signs that has made that even it makes it a little more challenging to crack into that, but it's really basic stuff like that. Not having your password on a sticky note next to your terminal, things like that. Basic cyber hygiene, access control. I don't think there's a company out there that if they've terminated an employee that had keys to the building, wouldn't get the keys back or change the locks. But do you do the same thing with access to your computer networks? That seems like a pretty simple thing to do to control who has access, because if you fired me, I'm probably not super happy about things, and maybe I'm going to do things that you don't want me to do. And so understanding who has access to your network, understanding basic systems like I laugh because I'm no longer guilty of this, but so I move around quite a bit. I get a new cable box and a router. You flip the router upside down, and there's a password that came with the router, right? How many of you changed that? All right, 1, 2, all right. We should all be changing it, right? Because that came from a manufacturer. Somebody has a serial number. They could go in and figure out what your password is. Now they have access to your network and go and do whatever you want. It's a really simple example. But when you think about all the IT and OT systems across a giant facility that are all interconnected, that come with pre-manufactured, pre-loaded passwords, and nobody's gone in and actually changed those, you've just opened the door for anybody to come in. Not really difficult. We did an example when I was here in New Orleans, and essentially we went around and sniffed for access points. So just like if you were here, you flip on your phone, turn on the Wi-Fi, and it tells you all the different places where you could get Wi-Fi. Some of them have a little lock on them, and some of them don't. It was amazing to me that the number of access points that we were able to just see, it was over 20,000 or so access points that you could actually try and figure out without too much trouble. Even with the ones that had encryption on them, had passwords, you could get into those. Of those, we were able to figure out which ones are actually operational technology. So it wasn't somebody's router in their house, it wasn't somebody's hotspot, it was actually a system that could be used to control a system, a generator, fuel valve, or something. More than half of those had no password protection on them. So somebody with very basic technology could ride around a facility, figure out this valve I can have access to and start playing with the valve. Basic things like that would go a long way to hardening. This is not super high-end technology. This is not bringing in CG cyber teams that are the keyboard jockeys that are on network hunting things. This is make sure you got a password, change the password frequently, exercise, understand your network. Basic things like that would really harden the system. Back to your original question though, we are going to have to, the cyber regulations will go out and they will have a standard. There will have to be waivers, exemptions, relief, because not everything will apply to every single system. I think that'll have to evolve over time. We'll see through feedback that certain mom and pop operations, 1-2 vessels, may not need to have a full penetration testing assessment. We're going to have to do that, but in the interest of getting this out, to set that baseline, we really needed to push forward with one standard. We'll have to adjust that going forward.
I'd say there's one more consideration with that too, and that is that, we as a system, if you consider us a national or international system, are only as strong as our weakest link. And so if somebody does take over a boat for a small carrier and uses it to do something nefarious, just as many people would suffer as if one of the larger companies got hit. And so that's got to be a consideration in the rulemaking.
And I would like to add a little bit on the aspect of the human element. I know that everybody touched upon that, and there is a lot of emphasis from the IAC side as well. So all the unified requirements which are coming out now are taking that into consideration. And I forgot to mention that I'm heavily involved with the IAC's work, anything related to digital and cyber. But also from the IMO side, in the revision of the, that happened I think in May at MSC 108, the revision of the guidelines for cyber risk management, it was added. There were more prescriptive requirements which were added, and there was an item for training for each one of the functional elements. So do you train your people for a protect functional element? Do you train your people for recovery actions, for incident response, and so forth? So there is a lot more emphasis that is put into that, and rightly so. At the same time, from what feedback we've been getting, there is a lot of confusion as to what needs to be followed, what the correct action should be. Having the proper training is sometimes challenging depending on the operator that you're talking about. They might have some basic awareness training but not have a role-based training, which is going to give them a little bit more of what they need to know. But I have come across also a number of vessels where they do have passwords with sticker notes saying 1, 2, 3, 4, or a password or whatever else. So yes, basic hygiene is important, but I think it's just the starting point. There is so much more that needs to happen. And one other point with regards to information sharing, there is an ongoing discussion at the IMO right now with regards to how can we share more information as far as incidents go. There is an open source database out there maintained by a university in Netherlands where all the current cybersecurity attacks can be found, which is maritime focused, and it has everything relates to shipping and ports, but that's not enough. It does not really provide any additional information. It's only taking what's off the web, which is already available. We need to know a little bit more of what's happening on a daily basis. And I know that from the operator side, there have been some forums where they're sharing information, whether that's piracy-related security issues and cybersecurity issues, but that's not an open forum for everybody to join. So this is something that I think it's a broader discussion that probably is going to be discussed at MTISAC next week in Houston, as far as to what do we do, how can we share amongst ourselves anonymized data that would help everybody. And that's something that IX is also working on, into identifying whether that should be a recommendation or some kind of instrument with regards to data sharing. So just wanted to point that out as well.
This Maritime Matters podcast is brought to you by ABS, a global classification leader driving a sustainable future for the maritime industry. From alternative fuels to digitalization to regulatory compliance, ABS understands the challenges facing today's ship owners and operators. By combining deep technical knowledge with the latest digital technologies, ABS provides clients with innovative, tailored, and practical sustainability solutions that deliver results. Show the world your commitment to its sustainability with ABS. Learn more at www.eagle.org.
Thank you very much. We've talked already about some of the threat picture. Stuart, you shared some very specific threats. And actually, I referenced the Wall Street Journal again because I happen to read it daily, but it's a related case, and it was talking about spoofing AIS on airlines, and particularly coming over the Black Sea, and how airlines were being spoofed, and they couldn't autocorrect, and the airline in question had actually landed in New Jersey, but according to its onboard equipment, it landed in the Atlantic Ocean. Can we dig? And I'm looking for anyone's perspective. And again, I know it's not necessarily popular to talk about in the public forum, but I really want to get to how pervasive this threat really is. We all hear about the Maersks, the NotPetya, the big threats, but on a daily, day-to-day basis, how pervasive is this threat today? And I assume it's only going to get worse.
It's a revelation of a system that was created before the presumption of security necessity. AIS has a purpose that it was designed for without any consideration whatsoever of nefarious use. And so there is no interlock. It's a dated system. It in and of itself will need to be replaced to do away with that threat. There will need to be some sort of way of authenticating messages that come through it. It was one of those things like, hey, it's great, we can get this ID. Fantastic. And for a long, long time, nobody even thought about messing with it. Right. And now all of a sudden people are. And, the cost of technology has become so low that you can order something from AliExpress that transmits on the right frequencies and allows you to construct something at home that does that. Mm-hmm. Right? You can also drive down the road and jam all of the other cars' GPS signals that are inbound. And so it's a big problem. And it's not going to be solved cheaply. It's not going to be solved quickly. Alternative channels need to be sought.
Yeah, and just, on the how pervasive is it? Every day, thousands and thousands of probing attacks are being attempted across a variety of networks, whether it's the federal government, Department of Defense, whether it's a local municipality. Systems are being probed and attacked on a regular basis, every day, 365, 24/7. And so anybody that suggests that they have a system that has not been attacked, I think, again, you probably aren't aware. A successful attack isn't necessarily the goal. The goal is, can I continue to poke on the wall and figure out where there's a hole? And then what do I do with that hole? Mm-hmm. There's also this, I think there's a belief that, well, I'm just a small operator. I'm not gonna be a target. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go after the big folks. I'm gonna go after Carnival, people that got big pots of money. Money doesn't always motivate folks, right? I think access to an easy open door, right? I mentioned that system we went through and sort of assessed what those Wi-Fi access points looked like. And the simple description of what that looks like is driving through a neighborhood from the street looking at everybody's front door and figuring out which doors were wide open and I could see inside the house. That's all I did. And if I were thinking about a case in the neighborhood, where do you think I'm gonna try and get in? Where I can see through the door because I don't have to mess with the lock, right? And so if all I do is walk around and look to make sure that, which houses am I gonna target? Those places with the open door. If the door's closed, I'm not even gonna go up there because maybe the door's locked, they got 3 bolts on it. But if the door's closed and the neighbor's door's wide open, where do you think I'm gonna go? And so this idea that, yeah, there are certainly some higher profile, higher desired target areas, but to suggest that, well, I'm a mom and pop or I'm a small operator in the middle of Iowa somewhere, I'm not going to be attacked. That's sort of a fool's errand there to think that way. It's opportunistic, and the idea from any type of attack there is disruption. It's disruption of your business, it's disruption of maybe a marine transportation system, disruption of your ability to do something, which gets back to, if you are disrupted, how quickly can you, from a resilience perspective, return to normal operation? Because then that no longer becomes sort of an interesting opportunity. There are absolutely those 15 or 16-year-old kids sitting in the basement that are just looking for things for fun. There are absolutely near-peer adversaries that are 100% every single day looking for opportunities to gain access to information, and all types of information. Information that can be then put into large databases using AI to be able to understand what makes you tick, what makes us tick. What will cause pain if I want to cause pain in a way that isn't obvious? And so anybody that would believe that this is just, we'll wait another year and it'll all go away. It's not going away, and we have to be in a position to harden our defenses every day, incrementally. We were talking about the regulations and, well, how come you didn't put a requirement for how big the password should be with 3 ampersands and it's like, because the minute I do that, by the time I get the memo started to get that process rolling, an adversary's already figured out how to overcome it. And so you can't just set the line in the sand and then assume that that's going to be good forever. You do have to have a systematic way of assessing your vulnerabilities, regularly evaluating whether those have been closed and what you can be doing to close those in near real time. I would say 38 minutes from identification of a target to exploitation is a really long time in the cyber world. If you're using advanced technology and you start that attack's happening in seconds globally, if you really are looking to impose pain. And so 38 minutes is a long time in the cyber world to have an open door that you should be closing.
Please,
Yeah.
Philip or Angeliki?
Yeah. Well, the other thing I would like to add is that according to the statistics, 80% of all the incidents are due to insiders. Yeah. So it's unintentional at times, lack of awareness, we're back to what we were discussing before, and also supply chain risks. And that's something that is quite important, and we've been getting a lot of questions as far as to how do we manage our suppliers? What do we do to hold them at the same security standard that we're holding ourselves? And this is something that it's been challenging to them. At times they're even afraid to talk to them, yet alone add clauses in their SLAs of specific cybersecurity controls. So just saying that this is something that we need to address as well.
I also think, just real quick, from an IT perspective, there is, again, I think a false sense of security that, well, if my IT system, my emails and my access to my spreadsheets are compromised, who cares? That's not going to be a big deal. I'll just, I've lost a couple of emails. But if you lose your invoices for the last 12 months, how are you going to then go back and reconstitute your business? There will be a disruption associated with that if you can't recover that information, as opposed to, there's been a lot of effort and focus on operational technology, being able to control a valve and cause problems. But if you think about, many of the systems that you have that make your business effective and efficient, if you lose access to those systems on your IT network, so your administrative assistant has access to that same network, and something happens through that network and you lose all of your business stuff, there will be a disruption. It will cause pain. Probably equally, maybe even more than having something that takes action on a valve that turns something and causes a generator to do so. So you really have to balance both of those and secure both sides of that fence.
Yeah, I was actually on the point of smaller companies being as big a targets as the Maersks of the world. I was just going to share an anecdote. 3 weeks ago, my colleague Matt, who's sitting over there, and I visited a ship management company, I'll just say in North America, to avoid embarrassing them, but they're not a customer of ours, but they confessed that they, through a phishing attack on one of their fleet managers who'd given up his credentials inadvertently, they became subject of a ransomware attack. And they only operate 12 ships. And the impact of that basically lasted 2 months on a day-to-day operational perspective. So they basically had to abandon the company email, and they were communicating with the ships, with the ship owners and with their business partners using their personal Gmail addresses. And then on top of that, they then had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars basically rebuilding their IT infrastructure from the scratch. Plus they paid the ransom on top of that. So it's a sort of thing that can bring a company down. But that was, I think there certainly is a myth that only the big people will get targeted, and that absolutely is a myth.
Excellent. Philip, I'll stay with you for a minute if that's okay, because we've been, we talk about this digitalization trend regularly across all of our media, across all of media, and we've been talking for years about the pipeline to the ship, that information flow back and forth, whether it's for seafarer communication, whether it's for business, whether it's for technical aspects, engines, maintenance from the shore. I guess my point or my question is, what is the role of providers, of those pipeline providers in this whole cybersecurity question? And then, from each of you actually, obviously, as Angeliki said, 80% are internal. You have to have your own house in order, but who else do you look to ensure that your operations are cyber secure? Yeah,
well, I mean, to sort of comment on your first point, first of all, I mean, yeah, the demand for data is massive. So as a provider of connectivity solutions whose traditional business was built in VSAT and most recently with Starlink. So I actually saw a report on my inbox this week. So not unexpectedly, the volume of data going through our network for Starlink is just, it's an exponential curve. But interestingly, the VSAT curve, which you might have expected to take a bit of a dive, it's actually remained pretty flat, maybe 3% down. So people are consuming vast quantities of data. I think for us, our obligations, I mentioned earlier on that we've moved to being a managed network provider, and we're trying to manage the different connectivity solutions. And alongside that, I think we clearly have an obligation to do what we can at our end to protect the data that's passing through our systems. And of course, the Starlink data, we've only got limited access to. So for us, it's important that we've offered our customers cyber solutions, cyber advice, vulnerability assessments, and so on. But I still think we can do that if we choose as a company in our strategy and make the necessary investments. But we're still in somewhat of a silo doing that. So to me, what I think needs to be, I guess, continued is engagement amongst what I would call the supplier community, along with the classification societies perhaps facilitating it, where we bring the connectivity providers, the classification societies, the OEMs who manage the OT equipment together, because we're all connected now. So if we don't all talk together, you're still operating in these silos, and that danger is going to persist.
From the regulatory aspect, I think from the IEX perspective, at least, we've tried to address all the different stakeholders that are part of this equation. So from the third-party suppliers of equipment and systems to the integrators, to the owners, to the shipyards, and of course class is playing a role, validating all of that. But back to your question, I think securing the different equipment and systems and building them with security in mind is something that is paramount. Adding on security later on is not as effective as having it in consideration from the very beginning. And that's what, when we are talking to the different equipment and system suppliers, this is something that we are emphasizing. I know that IXURE 27 is out there, which is targeting them, and it's just a subset of the international standard 62443, so it's very limited. There is so much more that can be done, but it's a starting point that was not there before. Unfortunately, that targets only new construction vessels. So for the existing vessels, I think there is a lot that needs to be added on from their side as well throughout the whole supply chain.
That's excellent. This is a topic we could talk about all day and all night, I'm sure, but I just kind of want to wrap up. I have one more question specifically for the two vessel owners, and then we'll open it up if anyone has questions in the audience. So specifically, everything comes down to money eventually, or a lot of it does. What are vessel owners' pain points as far as implementing a good cybersecurity protection plan?
For us is the bandwidth part of it, to be honest with you, as far as being able to understand, like for example, our construction vessels, we'll have 150 people on board. The cost involved to provide internet access for 150 people is a huge part of it. As far as when it comes to the cybersecurity part of that connectivity, then you have to understand this to be able to segregate from crew to passengers to so forth. So there's some costs involved in that too for us. But just generally the connectivity of it all, as far as being able to provide that and the speed offshore and to keep up with the technology advances that we have today. Like, for example, most of our crew members want to be able to talk to their families through video live feed, and be able to provide that is a huge cost on us. So data capabilities and storage. Another big thing that just recently came out is, I was talking to two guys before the meeting, is storage of video. So the Seafarer Act, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, or I don't think we will, but it requires our vessels to provide cameras throughout all areas where passengers, like their rooms and so forth. But not only does those cameras have to be on board, you have to provide a year's worth of storage of the video feed from those cameras. So that's a huge cost for us to be able to provide.
We don't have to talk about it. We can talk about it later. But we issued a policy letter so you don't have to keep a year's worth. It's motion activated.
Yeah.
So we'll follow that. Yeah.
But it was a.
It was. That's Congress, not Coast Guard.
Yeah. So for us, it was a huge weight, and like I was saying, a vessel the size of like our construction vessels, where you got 150 people on board, that's a huge cost that was going to be for us. So, but yeah, that's my perspective.
I think it comes down to a human element, a human communications problem. If the people who do cyber can speak the language of the people who do business and reduce the risks to numbers, then it should be a pretty easy argument. Because if you can provably show somebody how they can save X number of millions of dollars by implementing, X divided by 10 worth of measures, who wouldn't do that? Unless you're in financial distress or something along those lines, it's a pretty easy formula. The problem is the talent gap between people who speak technology and people who don't. It's often hard for cybersecurity people to sit down with the owners of the business, the heads of the business, and say, look, I'm going to drop all the jargon. We're not going to talk, XDRs and SIMs and, all the other cybersecurity apparatus. What we're going to talk is dollars and cents. You do this, and you avert the possibility of having to pay that. Just like you can sell an insurance policy to somebody, you can sell cyber security to somebody. And if it doesn't make financial sense, we're in the wrong business. Even for the little guys. There's a ton of cybersecurity tools, technologies, things that are out there. 99% of it are the basics. Come on, disaster recovery and business continuity planning was invented how many years ago? Right? That's the stuff that keeps you in business when things go south. That's your first focus. Second focus, basic firewalling, basic password security, basic education of end users. The really, really sophisticated attacks are going to get through even the most sophisticated technology, but most of it doesn't. We as a company see thousands of attempts on our doors every single day. Thousands of people trying the lock, trying the doorknob. Most of it just goes away. And it's not because of the most sophisticated things that we have, but most of it's averted by the least sophisticated things.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do when I get off the stage, I'm going to text my wife and tell her to change the password on my router. Because it's been the same, and I've shared it wildly. So, but we have a few more minutes, and I always like to open it up to the floor. Mr. Joseph Keefe, I don't think you need a microphone, but we have one if you need it.
I don't think I'll need one. So, listening to all of it, I'm going home too to change all my passwords and as quickly as possible. But it seems to me that you put out this notice of public rulemaking, and people are looking at it and they're reading it, and something needs to be done. And it seems to me like in the analogy I see here is the pain that the barge industry just went through with the sub-M regulations, the new audits that are coming out. They got through it. Do you see a role for class or the Coast Guard or some other entity to be doing audits at each of these companies as a part of the regulatory structure, because this is a safety issue, and now we have a new threat. It's not an oil spill this time, it's not ballast water, now we're talking about cybersecurity. So tell me how you think and this could go to anybody, maybe I think either ABS or Coast Guard might be able to speak to it from a regulatory standpoint. Where do you see the evolution of this?
So once the rules are in place, there will be a compliance element. And so whether they're vessel or facility inspectors coming out to ensure that you are meeting the intent of the regulation, meeting the requirement for exercises, whatever is in the rule, there will be a verification for those vessels and facilities that are subject to that rulemaking.
And so do you think the Coast Guard is adequately staffed right now to be providing that particular piece of expertise?
No.
No.
I mean, it will be more work. We will redistribute and retrain, reprioritize. We have resource proposals in to increase the number of folks that we have in the Coast Guard with those particular skill sets. But as it's widely known, we're in a recruiting challenge right now, and so even the billets that we have available, we're short. And so it will be a challenge. It'll be a shared responsibility. We'll have to rely on self-audits, verification. At the end of the day, I mean, as a prevention officer and as a regulator, I'm not a fan of requiring people to do anything, right? I would much rather you do it on your own if it's in your own best interest. I would much rather prevent the bad thing from happening than clean up the mess after it does. And so rules always provide the floor, but there's opportunities to go well above that. There are companies that don't have any rules in place right now that are super protected because they recognize the threat and they recognize the challenges that this could pose for their business model. But we will be able to meet that requirement. We've expanded the number of cyber protection teams that we have, which are high-end cyber warriors. We work with U.S. Cyber Command. These are the keyboard jockeys that can do offensive cyber work. We've got more of those folks, but the vast majority of this work is going to be auditing, ensuring that a plan is in place, that it's being tested, and it will not require those high-end, networking skills.
And maybe if I can add a little bit, as a recognized organization, I think that we're going to be facing the same challenges, not just against the Coast Guard regulation, but the IX requirements as well, and the rest. IMO is proposing new additional items, not very prescriptive, but still, they require an element of understanding of the intent behind each one of the requirements in order to be able to really assess it correctly. And right now, at least from the EBS side, we're training our auditors, the ones who are performing the ISM audits, to be able to perform this type of surveys as well. Is it a challenge? Of course. I think it's going to be a challenge for every classification society out there. And it's going to be a learning curve till we actually normalize and get familiar with what we have at hand right now. And once we reach that point, there's going to be new regulation, and then we'll have to have that continual training happening, because it's not like hull, it's not like machinery, like everything else that we're used to. It's something new, and people are also afraid to touch it. So we need, and we are making an effort to really get our people familiar, to understand also where this is coming from, why it's there, and what they need to do, and what's their role.
Well, just one other point on this. So as a prevention officer, I'm all about stopping the bad thing from happening in the first place and putting response out of business. But in February, the President expanded or clarified our role from Captain of the Port perspective through executive order. If there is a cyber incident that poses a threat or hazard to the port, local Captain of the Port has the authority to take control action of that facility or vessel, decouple it from the system so it cannot cause harm. And we will exercise that if necessary. Again, it's just like any other Captain of the Port authority, but if a particular cyber vulnerability, and it's specific to cyber, poses a threat or hazard to the port, local captains of port have all the authority they need to be able to decouple that and preserve, limit the potential impact from a safety and security perspective.
Hi, everyone. This question is for the Admiral. First of all, I'm super happy to hear that there's going to be some enforcement from the U.S. Coast Guard on these rules that are coming through, because historically we've seen that we've been calling them guidelines and not rules, and guidelines don't really carry the same weight among them. Like, for instance, with IMO in 2021, there were the cyber policy guidelines that still haven't been enforced to this day with operators. So I'm glad to hear that that's happening, but what is the timeline for this enforcement? If I'm an operator and I'm in non-compliance for, let's say in the case of IMO, like 3 years at this point, at what point can I start to expect to see some auditing happening from the U.S. Coast Guard or from other organizations that the U.S. Coast Guard might be working with on the enforcement end?
So because we are in an active rulemaking, I can't tell you when that rule is going to go into effect, but it is a presidential priority. It is a secretarial priority. My staff has been working overtime to try and get that thing through the wickets to get it out on the street. Once it goes into force, there are certain guidelines and certain steps for applicability when it comes into force. But we're actively out looking for challenges. Our teams are out doing assessments. And if we have identified, again, I go back to that executive order. If a team identifies a vulnerability that poses a threat or hazard to the port, the local captain of the port can take action to decouple that system from the network. But there will be a phased-in approach, at least on the domestic side. On the international side, the tools that are available to us under guidelines are a little bit less concrete.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And just as a follow-up to that, I understand there's only so much you can say because the rules aren't fully finalized and the enforcement measures aren't finalized. But if we're talking about just in terms of your experience, would you anticipate 1 year, 2 years, or even more before compliance would start being required?
Yeah,
or you really don't want to comment?
It'll be sooner rather than later.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you all for your comments, and thank you for terrifying us thoroughly. And what I was struck by, though, is even though Angeliki did mention this is we're part of a system, we're talking about the complexities of basically one part of that system. We have to broaden it beyond there. You know, the ports, you know, when we came out with the concerns about the Chinese cranes, the AAPA said, oh, don't look here, everything's fine, don't look here. We have to look at this whole thing holistically from every aspect and integrate all of the stakeholders, all of the players. And I was curious to know from Philip, you mentioned that you've got Marlink, but also port IT. I mean, how are they similar? How are they different? How do we come up with a mechanism, sort of like a central clearinghouse, to address all of the inputs that then lead to our individual businesses?
Well, I think you know, it's going to be up to companies like Marinelink and other companies who maybe consider themselves leaders in their field, I think, to take the initiative, and we certainly are. My personal view is that we need some kind of clearinghouse almost to do that, and to me the logical clearinghouse is the classification societies as almost being the common link between OEMs and connectivity providers, for example, and others in the industry. So, but you know, to do it, which we already are. It's just we just start speaking. And before this panel started, I know there was a spirited dialogue going with one of my colleagues and Angelique over there on that very topic. So we're certainly trying to engage, but of course it takes two to tango, or in this case 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 to tango. So.
And if I may add to that, with the development of autonomous operations, we've seen that, and this is something that IMO is working on, IX is working on, I've been into different conferences and they're all talking about it. How do we secure also the shore side? And the shore side can be many things. It can be ports, it can be remote operation centers, it can be vendors who have access to the systems, it can be anybody. So whoever is touching and has an impact on the vessel's operation should be addressed. And this is something that I think we've started talking about, but we have not really addressed all the elements yet.
So that ecosystem hasn't been identified yet, and it's not being addressed yet.
So CISA has an active rulemaking out on CERCIA, which is cyber incident reporting to harmonize, not just across maritime, but across all sectors. And so they're working to find a way to incorporate all that information into one central repository and then be able to distribute. The challenge, quite frankly, is what level of information is necessary for reporting. Do you need 7 pages of data, screenshots from what the attack was, for the vast majority of folks that need to have that information, or do you need to know that there has been an attack and that has been mitigated? And so working through that process, but CISA is working on that combined across multi-sector reporting mechanism that can then serve as that clearinghouse for an incident has happened or a particular vulnerability has been identified, and then be able to distribute that across all modes of transportation, all sectors.
And different areas in the world have different regulations. So EU now has NIS2. They're addressing critical infrastructure, so ports are part of that as well. The question is, rather the challenge is, how do we standardize what we will need to see? And that is question for the existing vessels, is for the port facilities, is for everything. Because it does create a lot of confusion from the owner side as far as to what do we need to follow, what do we need to do. There are different regulatory bodies saying different things, local regulations, state regulations, anything. So it's a little bit confusing. I think a standardization, some kind of normalization should take place, and then we can have additional requirements on top of that. But I think it's a work in progress.
To be honest with you, I think a lot of what was said here is pretty primitive stuff that most company's IT department is Bible. It's been there for a long time. Everybody knows about it. But my question here is, there is standardization, to my knowledge, right now, and that is through IACS. E26 and E27 went into effect 1 July 2024. And it is a pretty technical document. It's pretty deep, it's pretty heavy duty, and I'm just wondering if anybody can comment on that.
Yes, so as I said, I'm the chair of the IACS panel, where the URs came from. So I have a little bit more of insight of how these things evolved. At the same time, I can say that these are only applicable and mandatory to new construction vessels. They're baseline. It is a technical document. I think it would require a lot more controls that could be added there. And right now, from the IACS perspective, we are monitoring implementation efforts in order to identify what the next step should be. For the existing vessels, IACS is working on a recommendation document for cybersecurity controls. The initial timeline was saying that it's going to be published by the end of this year. I think we're going to be delayed a little bit. But that is going to also pose a baseline along with IMO, but that's going to be a recommendation and not requirement. Of course, there are other entities out there and flag administrations at times. I know MPA Singapore is working on their own cybersecurity guidelines. So that's why I said that there is a need for standardization. Before July 1st, there was nothing out there which was making cybersecurity controls mandatory in shipping. Now that is the first step, and we need to build upon that.
Well, again, I thank everyone for participating. I love the questions. I'm sorry we're not going to get to yours, but I'm mindful of everyone's time. I have one redeeming quality, and it's I try to be punctual. So again, please a round of applause for the people who gave the information. And again, we'll have some time afterwards if you'd like to get together and have a few questions. So thank you.
This Maritime Matters, the Marinelink Podcast, is brought to you by Marinelink. Marinelink is the leader in managed services for business-critical IT solutions, enabling transformation for remote assets on land and at sea. Thank you for listening to Maritime Matters. If you would like to be featured on a future Maritime Matters podcast, visit www.marinelink.com or email maritimematters@marinelink.com.